They were already arguing about removing him before the plane had even finished boarding. The aisle was blocked. A flight attendant stood rigid, one hand gripping the overhead bin, the other hovering near her radio. Her jaw was tight. Her smile was gone. Around her, passengers craned their necks, the soft murmur of an American red-eye flight, turning sharp, curious, uncomfortable. "Sir, I need you to step out of your seat." The man in seat 8A did not move. His name was Leonard Brooks, early 50s, black. Broad-shouldered, but worn down in a way that spoke of long days and careful restraint. He wore a dark windbreaker, zipped halfway, and old running shoes that had seen too many airport floors. His hands rested calmly on his thighs. No shaking, no panic. "I paid for this seat," Leonard said quietly. His voice was low, steady. The kind of voice that didn't rise because it didn't need to. "That's not the issue," the attendant replied, already sounding defensive. "We have a situation." A white man across the aisle leaned forward, irritation flashing across his face. "Can we hurry this up?" "Some of us have connections," another woman whispered. "What's going on?" Her hand tightened around her purse. Leonard looked past them out the oval window. The jet bridge lights glared against the glass, harsh and unforgiving. He took a slow breath through his nose. He had learned long ago how to breathe through moments like this. The attendant glanced at her tablet, then back at him. Her eyes lingered on his clothes, his posture, the scuffed shoes. Something hardened in her expression. "Sir, your ticket is under review. Until we verify, you need to stand up." Leonard didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He simply looked at her. Really looked and said, "Ma'am, if you're going to take my seat, I'd like to know why." Behind them, a second attendant approached, younger eyes darting between her colleague and Leonard. "What's happening?" "He's refusing to cooperate," the first attendant said quickly. Leonard turned his head slightly. "That's not true." The younger attendant hesitated. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass again?" Leonard reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements. He unfolded the paper and handed it over. The younger attendant scanned it. Her brow furrowed. "It says 8A, she murmured. The first attendant snapped. "We know what it says. There's a system issue." Leonard caught the flicker of uncertainty in the younger woman's eyes. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but didn't. Instead, she stepped back. A man, a few rows up, chuckled under his breath. "Figures." Leonard felt it then. The shift in the air, the subtle weight pressing down on his chest. Not fear. Recognition. This was one of those moments, the kind you never forget, because your body remembers them before your mind does. He thought of the voicemail he had left an hour earlier. His daughter's voice, still half asleep, laughing, because he promised to bring her back a souvenir bigger than the kitchen table. He thought of how carefully he'd planned this trip. Short, efficient, no risks, in and out. And now this. "Sir," the first attendant said again, sharper now. "I'm calling the captain." She turned away before Leonard could respond. The cabin noise swelled, a low, uneasy buzz. Someone behind Leonard muttered, "This is ridiculous." Someone else said, "Why him?" as if Leonard were an object, not a person sitting right there. Leonard leaned back slightly in his seat. He clasped his hands together. His knuckles were thick scarred, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime solving problems quietly behind closed doors without applause. Across the aisle, an older white woman watched him closely. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Pearl earrings, hair set perfectly. She caught his eye and gave a small, uncertain smile. Not friendly, not hostile, just human. "You okay?" she asked softly. Leonard nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." The captain emerged a moment later. Tall, grey hair, crisp uniform. Authority wrapped neatly around him like a tailored coat. The aisle fell silent. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. The first attendant spoke immediately. "This passenger's ticket is flagged. We need him to step off until it's resolved." Leonard looked up at the captain. Calm, unflinching. "Sir, may I ask what the flag is?" The captain glanced at the tablet, then at Leonard. His gaze lingered, assessing, measuring. "There's a discrepancy," with what Leonard asked. The captain paused. Just a beat too long. "Seat assignment." Leonard exhaled slowly. "I've flown this route many times. Same airline, same procedures. This is the seat I was assigned." The captain's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight. "I need you to comply so we can keep this flight on schedule." There it was. Schedule over dignity. Efficiency over fairness. Leonard had heard variations of that sentence his entire adult life. A man in business class spoke up. "Captain, if there's an issue, can't he just sit somewhere else?" Leonard turned his head toward the voice. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "Would you—" The man opened his mouth, then closed it, looked away. The older woman across the aisle straightened in her seat. He asked a fair question. The first attendant shot her a look. "Ma'am, please remain seated." Leonard felt the moment tightening like a wire pulled too far. He knew what came next. He had seen it play out in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in hospitals, in places where power decided who was believable. The captain stepped closer. His voice dropped controlled. "Sir, if you don't stand up now, I'll have no choice but to remove you from this aircraft. Remove you." Leonard stared at him. He felt the eyes of every passenger drilling into his back. He felt the judgment, the assumptions, the quiet relief of those grateful. It wasn't them. He thought of his daughter again. He thought of the promise he'd made to always come home. And he thought of another promise, older, heavier one, he had never spoken aloud. Leonard slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. A murmur rippled through the cabin. But he didn't stand. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and said softly, "Captain, before you make that call, I want you to understand something. If you remove me from this plane without cause, it won't end here." The first attendant scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Leonard shook his head once. "No, it's a consequence." The captain studied him, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir, I don't have time for this." Leonard met his gaze, steady as stone. "Then you should make time." because the reason this seat matters has nothing to do with comfort." The captain opened his mouth to respond, but the younger attendant suddenly stepped forward. Her face had gone pale. "Captain," she said quietly, "you might want to check the passenger notes again. The secondary file." The captain frowned. "What secondary file?" She swallowed. "The one attached to his name." "A beat." The captain turned back to his tablet. Scrolled. His eyes narrowed, then widened just slightly. Leonard watched the shift happen in real time. The stiffening spine. The recalibration. The captain looked up slowly. His voice, when he spoke, had changed. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "may I speak with you privately?" Leonard didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded once. And in that moment, as the cabin held its breath, the people who had already decided who Leonard Brooks was began to realize they might have made a very serious mistake. The cockpit door closed behind Leonard with a muted click that sounded louder than it should have. The captain did not invite him to sit. He didn't offer water. He stood near the center console, one hand braced against the panel as if grounding himself. The younger attendant remained by the door, eyes fixed on the floor, breathing too fast. "Mr. Brooks," the captain said, lowering his voice. "There's information attached to your name that wasn't visible on the main manifest." Leonard studied the man's face. He saw it now. The uncertainty, the recalculation, the quiet fear that came when authority realized it might have stepped into the wrong story. "I assumed as much," Leonard replied. The captain cleared his throat. "This flight is governed by federal aviation procedures." If there's even a suggestion of Leonard lifted a hand. Not abrupt, not threatening, just enough to stop the words. "Captain, I'm not here to debate policy. I'm here because your crew decided I didn't belong where I was sitting." Silence settled between them, thick and pressurized. The captain glanced at the attendant. "Jennifer, give us a moment." She hesitated. "Sir, that's an order." She nodded and slipped out, closing the door again. The captain turned back to Leonard. His posture softened just slightly. "You need to understand how this looks from our side." Leonard's lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand exactly how it looks. I've been understanding it my entire life." The captain exhaled slowly. "Your file indicates extensive involvement with regulatory agencies." Leonard tilted his head. "That's one way to phrase it. And that you're traveling under a personal booking, not corporate." "That is also correct." The captain hesitated again, then spoke more carefully. "Sir, are you currently affiliated with any entity that might create a conflict of interest with this airline?" Leonard met his eyes. "Not a conflict, an oversight." The captain's grip tightened on the console. "Oversight." Leonard leaned back against the bulkhead, folding his arms. The space felt smaller now, the hum of electronics louder. "Let me ask you something, Captain. When your crew flagged my seat, did anyone ask why I was flying alone on a weekday? Did anyone wonder why my ticket was paid in full? Not upgraded, not transferred?" The captain didn't answer. Leonard nodded. "No." They saw a man who didn't match their expectations and worked backward from there. The captain's jaw flexed. "You're implying discrimination. I'm stating a pattern." Another pause. Outside the cockpit, the muffled sounds of the cabin leaked through the door. Voices, shuffling feet. The tension hadn't dissipated. It was fermenting. "Mr. Brooks," the captain said carefully. "What exactly do you want right now?" Leonard didn't answer immediately. He thought of the older woman across the aisle, the way she'd spoken up when others stayed silent. He thought of his daughter's face on his phone screen, earlier gap-toothed smile frozen mid-laugh. "I want to sit in the seat I paid for," he said. "And I want your crew to understand why removing someone without cause has consequences that extend far beyond this flight." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening litigation?" Leonard shook his head. "No. I'm explaining reality." The captain looked down at the tablet again. Scrolled. Stopped. His face drained of color just enough to notice. "Sir," he said quietly, "this indicates you serve as a non-executive chair on multiple transportation oversight boards." Leonard watched him closely. "Formally. And that you advised on safety compliance frameworks for—" He stopped himself. "For airlines," Leonard finished. The captain swallowed. "Including this one." Another beat. The hum of the aircraft seemed to grow louder, like the plane itself was listening. "Yes," Leonard said. "Including this one." The captain straightened. His voice shifted. Respect crept in, reluctant and late. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Leonard's eyes hardened. "Because I shouldn't have to." The captain nodded once, slowly. He understood that answer better than he wanted to admit. A knock sounded at the door. Jennifer's voice filtered through. "Captain Ground Control is asking about the delay." The captain closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the decision had been made. "One moment." He turned back to Leonard. "I'm going to resolve this." Leonard pushed off the bulkhead. "You should also resolve how it happened." The captain hesitated, then nodded. "I will." They stepped back into the aisle together. The cabin went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Every eye followed them. Phones hovered just below shoulder level, recording without recording. The first attendant stiffened when she saw Leonard beside the captain. Her smile flickered back into place, brittle and forced. "Captain, we're ready to—" "Please return to your station," the captain said. Voice firm. Her mouth opened, closed. She nodded and stepped aside. The captain addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We experienced a brief administrative delay. It has been resolved." Leonard moved toward his seat. The aisle parted reluctantly, like water around a stone. As he sat down, the older woman across from him leaned slightly closer. "I thought they'd never listen," she murmured. Leonard met her eyes. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just realize who's watching. A man 2 rows back scoffed softly. "Must be nice," he muttered. Leonard heard him. He didn't respond. The younger attendant approached, face flushed. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm sorry." Leonard looked up at her. He saw genuine remorse there. Fear, too. "Thank you," he said, "for speaking up." She nodded, eyes shining, and moved on. The plane pushed back minutes later. The familiar lurch, the steady acceleration. Leonard watched the terminal slide away through the window lights, blurring into streaks. Across the aisle, the older woman folded her hands in her lap. "You didn't raise your voice," she said. "I would have." Leonard smiled faintly. "I used to." She studied him. What changed, Leonard thought for a moment. I learned that control is louder than anger. The engines roared as the plane lifted into the night. The cabin settled into that strange, suspended calm that came after turbulence, emotional or otherwise. Leonard closed his eyes briefly. He felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest. Not triumph, not relief, responsibility. Somewhere behind him, the first attendant whispered to a colleague, her voice tight. I didn't know. Leonard heard that too. He opened his eyes and looked out into the darkness, the city shrinking beneath them. He knew this wasn't over. He knew what came next would ripple outward, touching policies, reputations, careers. And as the plane climbed higher, Leonard Brooks sat quietly in seat 8. Fully aware that by the time this flight landed, an entire system would be forced to look itself in the mirror. The turbulence began without warning, sharp and violent, like the sky had struck the plane with a closed fist. The cabin jolted. A drink cart rattled. Somewhere, a glass shattered. The seatbelt sign flashed on its chime, swallowed by the sudden rush of startled voices. Leonard's body reacted before his mind did. His hands gripped the armrests. His shoulders squared. He didn't panic. He assessed. Across the aisle, the older woman gasped as the plane dropped her fingers, clawing at the seatbelt. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice followed, controlled but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated, with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence." The word unexpected hung in the air. Leonard felt it then. Not fear. Recognition. This wasn't routine. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time. A baby cried somewhere behind him. A man cursed under his breath. Oxygen masks stayed in place, but the overhead panels creaked ominously like bones under strain. The first attendant moved down the aisle, her earlier confidence replaced by tension she could no longer hide. "Everyone stay seated," she said, voice tight. "Please." Leonard watched her closely. Her hands were shaking. The turbulence didn't fade. It escalated. The plane dipped again, long and sickening. Leonard's stomach lifted into his throat. Around him, prayers murmured in low, frantic tones. The older woman squeezed her eyes shut, lips moving silently. Then a sound cut through the chaos, a sharp gasp, followed by a thud. Leonard turned. 3 rows back, a man had slumped forward into the aisle. Mid-60s, heavy-set, pale. His arm twitched once, then went still. "Help someone," shouted. He collapsed. The attendant spun around. "Medical professional," she called, voice rising. "Is there a doctor on board?" No one moved. Leonard was already unbuckling. The older woman grabbed his sleeve. "What are you doing?" Leonard met her eyes. "What I have to." He stepped into the aisle as the plane rocked again. He crouched beside the fallen man. The man's eyes were open, but unfocused. His breathing was shallow, ragged. Leonard pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Weak pulse, irregular. The younger attendant rushed over, face pale. "Sir, you need to sit down. It's not safe." Leonard looked up at her. His voice cut through the noise. "He's in cardiac distress." Her eyes widened. "Are you a doctor?" "No," Leonard said. "But I've seen this before." Another jolt hit the plane. Leonard braced one knee against the floor, steadying himself. He loosened the man's collar, tilted his head back slightly to open the airway. "Do you have a defibrillator?" Leonard asked. The attendant blinked. "Yes, but—" "Get it. Now." She hesitated for half a second, then ran. A man nearby scoffed nervously. "This is insane. He's not even medical." Leonard didn't look up. "Sir," he said evenly, "if you'd like to take over, please do." Silence. The defibrillator arrived in trembling hands. Leonard took it, snapping it open with practiced efficiency. The plane lurched again, throwing him off balance. He adjusted, grounded himself. "Clear some space," he said. The older woman stood, despite the turbulence, shielding the scene with her body. "Give him room," she snapped at onlookers. "Now!" Leonard attached the pads, his movements precise. He watched the monitor. The rhythm was chaotic, dangerous. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, strained now. "Cabin crew report status." The younger attendant grabbed the handset, voice shaking. "Passenger collapse. Possible cardiac event." Leonard glanced up at the ceiling, calculating. Turbulence. Limited response time. He pressed the button. Clear. The shock jolted the man's body. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Leonard watched the monitor. The rhythm stuttered, then shifted. Still unstable. Again, Leonard said. The attendant hesitated. "Sir, protocol." Again, Leonard repeated, sharper now. She nodded and stepped back. The second shock hit. The man convulsed, then went still. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the monitor stabilized into a slow, fragile rhythm. Leonard exhaled through his nose. "He's back," he said quietly. "But he needs a hospital." The attendant wiped tears from her cheeks. "We're hours from land." Leonard looked up. "Then you need to tell the cockpit exactly what's happening." "Not a summary. The truth." She hesitated. "They're already dealing with the turbulence." Leonard stood slowly, bracing as the plane rocked again. His voice lowered. "So am I." "Tell them anyway." She met his gaze. For a moment, the hierarchy wavered. Then she nodded and ran. Leonard knelt beside the man again, monitoring his breathing. The older woman hovered nearby, her earlier fear replaced by fierce focus. "You didn't hesitate," she said. Why Leonard didn't look at her? Because hesitation kills. The turbulence began to ease, but the tension didn't. Passengers whispered, watched, judged. A man across the aisle leaned toward his companion. "Who does he think he is?" Leonard heard that, too. The younger attendant returned, breathless. "Captain wants to speak with you. Now!" Leonard looked at the unconscious man, then at the older woman. "Stay with him. Keep him warm." She nodded. "Go." Leonard followed the attendant forward, gripping seat backs as the plane swayed. Inside the cockpit, the air felt heavier. The captain looked up sharply. "What happened?" Leonard spoke quickly, efficiently. "Passenger went into cardiac arrhythmia. We shocked him twice. He's stable but critical. You need to divert." The first officer shook his head. "Weather's unstable. Nearest suitable airport is limited." Leonard stepped closer. "Limited is better than none." The captain studied him, the earlier recalibration deepening into something more complex. You handled that like a professional. Leonard met his eyes. I've been in rooms where seconds mattered. The captain turned back to the controls, jaw tight. We'll divert. I'll notify control. Leonard nodded. Do it now. As he turned to leave, the captain spoke again. Mr. Brooks. Leonard paused. You said earlier this wouldn't end here, the captain said. I'm beginning to understand what you meant. Leonard didn't respond. He stepped back into the cabin. The passengers watched him differently now, some with relief, some with resentment, some with something like awe. The older woman squeezed his hand as he passed. You saved him. Leonard shook his head. Not yet. He returned to the fallen man's side as the plane began its slow, careful turn. Outside, the night shifted, the stars sliding across the window like silent witnesses. Leonard sat back on his heels, exhaustion creeping into his bones. He felt the weight of every eye, every assumption, every recalculation. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the calm, a familiar certainty settled in. Whatever this flight was becoming, it was no longer just about a seat. The announcement came softer this time, but it landed heavier. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a medical emergency and developing weather conditions, we will be diverting. Please remain seated. A collective reaction rippled through the cabin. Not panic, not relief. Something in between. The sound people make when control is taken from them, without warning. Leonard remained kneeling beside the unconscious man. The defibrillator rested open near his knee, its screen glowing faintly. The man's breathing was shallow but steady. Leonard counted the seconds between each rise of the chest. Too long. Still acceptable. For now. The older woman watched him closely. You're exhausted, she said quietly. Leonard didn't look up. Not yet. Across the aisle, a man in a navy blazer shook his head, irritation barely contained. This is unbelievable. We're diverting because of one passenger. The older woman turned on him. That one passenger is alive because of him. The man scoffed. That's not the point. Leonard finally looked up. His gaze was calm, measured. It is the point, he said. It's just not the one you like. The man opened his mouth, then thought better of it. He leaned back, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. The turbulence returned in waves less violent than before, but persistent like a warning that hadn't finished speaking. The plane trembled. Overhead bins rattled softly. The lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft adjusted course. Leonard felt it in his bones. This wasn't just weather. The younger attendant returned, crouching beside him. Captain wants an update. Leonard checked the man's pulse again. He's holding, but barely. He needs ground care soon. She nodded. We're diverting to a regional airport, limited facilities. Leonard's jaw tightened. Limited how small ER. No cath lab. Leonard closed his eyes for a brief second. Calculated. Then opened them. Then you need to tell the captain to request a ground transfer immediately on landing. No delays. No paperwork. She hesitated. Sir, procedures. Leonard looked at her not unkindly, but with absolute certainty. Procedures won't restart his heart if it stops again. She swallowed. I'll tell him. As she moved away, Leonard felt the familiar sensation of being watched shift again. The eyes on him were different now, less dismissive, more searching. A man 2 rows ahead leaned into the aisle. Early 40s, expensive watch, corporate posture. You seem to know a lot for someone who said he's not a doctor. Leonard met his gaze. Experience doesn't always come with a title. The man studied him. Military Leonard didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the blanket over the unconscious man's legs. Why does it matter? The man smiled thinly. People like to know who they're trusting. Leonard straightened slowly. People like to believe trust is something they get to choose. In moments like this, it's already chosen for them. The man looked away, unsettled. The older woman exhaled softly. You make people uncomfortable. Leonard allowed himself the faintest smile. I've been told. Minutes stretched. The cabin settled into a tense, watchful quiet. No movies played, no pages turned. Time felt suspended, measured only by the hum of the engines and the fragile rhythm of a man's breath. Leonard's phone vibrated against his leg. He ignored it. It vibrated again. The older woman glanced at his pocket. You might want to check that. Leonard hesitated, then reached for it. One missed call, then another, then a text. Unknown number. He opened it. Are you on flight 721? Leonard frowned. He typed back with one hand. Who's asking? The reply came almost instantly. FAA operations. We need to speak with you. Leonard's breath slowed. Around him the plane creaked as it descended another 1,000 feet. The reality of the situation sharpened. He typed, You should already have my file. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then another message. We do. That's why we're calling. Leonard locked the screen and slid the phone back into his pocket. The older woman watched his face closely. Bad news. Leonard shook his head once. Complicated news. The younger attendant hurried back, her expression tight. Captain wants you in the cockpit again. Leonard stood carefully bracing as the plane shuddered. He looked down at the unconscious man, then at the older woman. Stay with him. I will, she said firmly. As Leonard moved forward, whispers followed him. Not accusations this time. Questions. Who is he? Why does the captain keep calling him? Did you see what he did? Inside the cockpit. The mood had shifted again. The first officer's hands were clenched on the controls. The captain's face was set, eyes flicking between instruments and screens. Leonard, the captain, said without preamble. We have another issue. Leonard stepped closer. Tell me. We're getting pressure alerts in one of the auxiliary systems. Not critical yet, but combined with the weather and the diversion, Leonard studied the display. His eyes moved fast. Tracked patterns. Correlations. It's not random. The first officer looked at him sharply. How do you know that? Leonard pointed. Because the fluctuations are synchronized with the turbulence spikes. That suggests strain, not failure. The captain stared at him. You're speaking like an engineer. Leonard didn't look away. I am one. The captain hesitated. FAA operations contacted us, asked if you were on board. Leonard nodded. They contacted me too. The cockpit fell silent. The first officer broke it. Why would the FAA be tracking a passenger? Leonard considered his answer, then chose the truth. Because I helped write the compliance protocols that determine when an aircraft can legally continue a flight under compound stress. The captain's grip tightened on the yoke. You're telling me you helped design the rules we're operating under right now? Yes. The first officer let out a short, incredulous laugh. You were sitting in economy. Leonard met his eyes. I was sitting in a seat I paid for. Another alert chimed softly. The captain exhaled. Leonard, if this escalates, I need to know what our margins are. Leonard leaned over the console, scanning. You have a window. Narrow. But it's there. The problem isn't the aircraft. It's decision delay. The captain looked at him sharply. Are you saying my crew hesitated? Leonard's voice remained calm. I'm saying systems fail faster when people are afraid to act. The captain absorbed that, nodded once. Then tell me what you'd do. Leonard didn't hesitate. Commit to the diversion fully. Reduce non-essential load. Prepare emergency services now, not on approach, and stop worrying about schedule. The first officer swallowed. That'll raise flags. Leonard straightened. Flags are easier to deal with than funerals. The captain looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Do it. As Leonard turned to leave, the captain spoke again, quieter. You didn't have to get involved. Leonard paused at the door. Yes, he said. I did. Back in the cabin, the descent was more noticeable now. Ears popped. Lights flickered briefly, then steadied. The older woman looked up as Leonard returned. How bad is it? Leonard knelt again beside the unconscious man. Bad enough to matter. Not bad enough to stop us. She studied his face. You carry a lot of responsibility. Leonard adjusted the oxygen mask. I carry it because too many people drop it. The plane banked gently. Somewhere ahead, a runway was being cleared. Somewhere behind, assumptions were unraveling. Leonard Brooks stayed where he was, hands, steady eyes, focused, fully aware that by the time the wheels touched the ground, the story of this flight would already be rewriting itself. The descent grew steeper, and with it came a new kind of silence, the kind that settles when people realize there will be no comforting update, no neat reassurance. The cabin lights dimmed to a muted amber. Outside the windows, clouds slid past in thick, colorless layers. Leonard felt the change in pressure through his bones, a dull ache behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with gravity. The unconscious man stirred. It was subtle at first, a twitch of the fingers, a shallow intake of breath that caught and then released. Leonard leaned closer immediately, one hand steady on the man's shoulder. Stay with me, Leonard murmured, though he didn't know if the man could hear him. Don't go anywhere yet. The older woman crouched beside them, her composure fraying at the edges. Is that good or bad? Leonard checked the monitor again. The rhythm was uneven but present. It's something he said. Something is better than nothing. A sudden bump jolted the aircraft. A sharp drop, brief but violent. Several passengers cried out. Overhead, bins rattled. The older woman grabbed the armrest, her knuckles whitening. Leonard didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance, anchoring himself between the seats, shielding the unconscious man from the movement with his body. Across the aisle, The man in the navy blazer whispered to his seatmate, voice tight. "This is insane. We should have never let this go on." Leonard heard him. He always heard them. The younger attendant rushed down the aisle again, breathless. "Captain says we're 15 minutes out. Emergency crews are standing by." Leonard nodded. "Good." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They also asked if you're willing to stay after landing. FAA, Airline, legal hospital staff. Everyone." Leonard didn't look up. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes flickered with something like relief. "Thank you." Another vibration rippled through the plane, longer this time, a sustained shudder that made the floor hum beneath Leonard's knees. The engines changed pitch, a subtle shift that most passengers wouldn't notice, but Leonard did. Power adjustment. Weight management. The older woman swallowed. "You know what all these sounds mean." Leonard kept his eyes on the man's chest. "Enough to know when they matter." A man farther back began to pray aloud, his voice trembling. Others joined him softly, a chorus of murmured faith filling the cabin. Someone else wept quietly, face buried in their hands. The navy blazer man snapped, "Can we keep it down?" The older woman turned on him, eyes blazing. "If prayer bothers you now, that's your problem." He recoiled, stunned into silence. Leonard felt the plane bank slightly, the horizon tilting just enough to unsettle. He reached for the defibrillator again, just in case. His fingers hovered over the controls, ready. His phone vibrated once more. He ignored it. It vibrated again, insistent this time. The older woman glanced at his pocket. That might be important. Leonard exhaled through his nose and checked the screen. FAA operations. Incoming call. He declined it and typed quickly. Landing in progress. Talk after. The reply came instantly. Understood. Be advised, media has been alerted due to diversion protocol. Leonard closed his eyes for half a second. Media meant questions. Narratives. People deciding what this moment meant before it had even finished happening. He slid the phone away. The younger attendant returned yet again, her professional mask cracking. "Sir, some passengers are asking who you are." Leonard looked up at her. "Tell them I'm someone trying to get us on the ground." She nodded. "They're not satisfied with that." Leonard's gaze hardened just a fraction. "They'll survive." Another jolt hit the plane, this one accompanied by a metallic groan that echoed faintly through the cabin. Several passengers screamed. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a chorus of pops and hisses. The older woman gasped. "Oh, God." Leonard grabbed the nearest mask and secured it over the unconscious man's face, then pulled one down for himself without breaking rhythm. He motioned for the older woman to do the same. "Breathe," he told her. "Slow." She followed his lead chest, rising and falling unevenly, at first, then gradually settling. The captain's voice came over the intercom, no longer polished. "Brace for landing. This may be rough." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. Passengers leaned forward, heads down, arms crossed, hands gripping seatbacks. The prayers grew louder. The crying sharper. Leonard positioned himself low and steady, one arm braced against the floor, the other shielding the man. He felt the aircraft fighting the air, felt the strain in every vibration. The navy blazer man's voice cracked. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Leonard turned his head just enough to meet the man's eyes. "We are," he said. Not loud, not dramatic. Certain. The man stared at him, searching for something to doubt, and found none. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud that reverberated through the cabin. The plane lurched, dipped, then steadied. The sound of wind roared louder, a relentless rush that drowned out all other noise. Leonard counted under his breath. Seconds, heartbeats, distance. Then the wheels hit. The impact was brutal. The plane slammed onto the runway, bounced once hard, then again lighter, before settling into a violent shudder as the brakes engaged. Passengers screamed as the force threw them forward against their restraints. Overhead compartments burst open, bags tumbling out. Leonard held on, muscles straining, teeth clenched. He felt the deceleration tear at his body, felt the aircraft fight to stay upright. The engines roared in reverse, a deafening howl. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air, and then gradually, impossibly, the plane slowed. The roar faded to a rumble, the rumble to a crawl. Silence fell like a held breath. The aircraft stopped. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one spoke. Then the cabin exploded. People sobbed openly, laughed hysterically, reached for strangers, clutching hands, embracing without asking permission. The older woman collapsed back into her seat, tears streaming down her face. Leonard didn't celebrate. He checked the man immediately. The pulse was still there, weak but steady. "He made it," Leonard said quietly. The older woman covered her mouth with both hands. "You did it." Leonard shook his head. "We did." Emergency lights flashed through the windows. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The smell of rain mixed with fuel and scorched rubber seeped into the cabin. The captain's voice returned, shaking now. "Remain seated. Emergency crews are approaching." Leonard stayed where he was as medics boarded their movements, swift and practiced. They took over without question, loading the man onto a stretcher, attaching monitors, administering oxygen. One of the paramedics glanced at Leonard. "You the one who shocked him?" Leonard nodded once. The paramedic's eyebrows lifted. "You saved his life." Leonard looked past him out the window where flashing lights painted the night in red and blue. "I kept him alive," he said. "That's all." As the cabin slowly emptied, passengers filed past Leonard Henne, pausing to look at him differently now. Some murmured thanks. Some nodded in quiet respect. A few avoided his eyes entirely. The navy blazer man stopped in front of him, face pale. "I was wrong," he said stiffly. Leonard met his gaze. "About what?" "About you." Leonard studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him pass. "Learn from it." The man swallowed and walked on. Leonard remained seated until the last stretcher was gone, until the noise receded, until the plane felt empty and still. Only then did he stand his body, finally acknowledging the exhaustion that had been waiting patiently in the wings. As he stepped onto the tarmac, cold air biting at his skin, a line of officials waited. Airline representatives, airport authorities, a man in a dark coat holding a badge that read FAA. Leonard stopped in front of them, his posture straight, despite the ache in his muscles. The FAA official spoke first. "Mr. Brooks, we need to debrief." Leonard nodded. "You will." The official hesitated, then extended his hand. "And for the record, what you did tonight went far beyond expectation." Leonard shook his hand firm and brief. So did what led to it. The official's expression tightened. Behind Leonard, the plane sat silent under the floodlights, scars fresh on its tires, story heavy in its metal bones. Leonard Brooks looked back at it once, then turned toward the waiting questions, fully aware that the hardest part of this night was only just beginning. The debriefing room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant, a place designed to drain emotion from events that refused to be drained. Leonard sat at the narrow table jacket, unzipped, now hands folded loosely in front of him. Across from him, 3 men and 1 woman arranged their folders with careful precision. FAA, Airline Legal, Safety Compliance, Titles without warmth. A recorder clicked on. "Mr. Brooks," the woman said. Late 40s, steel-grey hair, pulled back tight for the record. "Please state your full name." "Leonard Samuel Brooks." "And your current occupation, independent systems consultant." One of the men glanced down at his file, then back up. "You were formerly the principal architect behind multiple federal compliance models for commercial aviation." Leonard nodded once. "I was part of the team." The man frowned. "You led the team." Leonard didn't correct him. Another man leaned forward, younger, impatient. "Why were you traveling without notifying the airline of your background?" Leonard met his gaze. "Because I was traveling as a passenger." The younger man scoffed. "Given what happened, that feels irresponsible." Leonard's eyes hardened. "What feels irresponsible is assuming safety depends on status instead of systems." Silence pressed down on the table. The woman cleared her throat. "Let's stay focused. Mr. Brooks. During the flight, you intervened in a medical emergency, advised the cockpit during a diversion, and communicated with FAA operations independently. Do you acknowledge that these actions fall outside standard passenger conduct?" Leonard's voice was calm. "I acknowledge that standard conduct failed long before I acted." The older man at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. "Are you saying the crew mishandled the situation?" Leonard leaned back slightly. "I'm saying the system created hesitation, and hesitation nearly cost a life." The recorder hummed softly, capturing every word. "Let's talk about the seat incident," the woman said. "Why didn't you identify yourself when the crew questioned you?" Leonard didn't answer immediately. He looked at the blank wall behind them, then back at her. "Because I wanted to see how your procedures worked when no one thought they were being watched." The younger man's jaw dropped. "You tested them." Leonard's gaze was steady. "I lived inside them." Another pause. He could feel the weight of it now, the slow realization spreading across the table. This wasn't a lucky coincidence. It was exposure. "You understand," the woman said carefully, "that this could have serious implications for the airline." Leonard nodded. "It already does." A knock interrupted them. The door opened, and the older woman from the plane stepped in, escorted by a security officer. Her posture was composed, eyes sharp despite the long night. "I asked to speak," she said. "They told me you were here." Leonard looked up, surprised. "Ma'am?" She waved him off gently. "I won't take much time." The woman at the table frowned. "This is a restricted—" "I watched him save a man's life," the older woman said, voice firm. "And I watched your crew nearly throw him off the plane for sitting in the wrong seat. If you're writing a record, then you should hear from someone who was there." No one stopped her. She turned to Leonard. "You didn't owe anyone anything tonight, but you gave it anyway." Leonard inclined his head. "Thank you." She looked back at the officials. People like him don't announce who they are. They assume the system will do the right thing. Tonight it didn't. She left as quietly as she'd entered. The room felt smaller after that. The younger man rubbed his temples. "This is going to be a nightmare." Leonard stood. "No," he said. "A nightmare is when nobody survives to tell the truth." The woman glanced at her colleagues, then back at Leonard. "We'll need a formal statement." "You'll get one," Leonard replied. "After I make a phone call." She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Leonard stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights harsh against his tired eyes. He pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found the contact he'd been avoiding all night. Home. It rang once. Twice, Dad. His daughter's voice came through small and sleepy. "Why is Grandma crying?" Leonard closed his eyes. "Hey, kiddo. Everything's okay. You said you'd be home tonight." "I know." His voice caught just slightly. "I had to help some people first." There was a pause. "Like when you fix things." "Yes," Leonard said. "Like that." She yawned. "Did you fix the plane?" Leonard smiled despite himself. "With help." "I told Grandma you always do the right thing," she murmured, "even when it's hard." Something in Leonard's chest tightened. "I'll be home soon," he said. "I promise." "Okay," she whispered. "I love you. I love you too." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. Then footsteps approached. The captain stood a few feet away, no uniform now, just a rumpled shirt, and the look of a man who had aged years in hours. "They told me what you said in there." Leonard met his eyes. "Good." The captain swallowed. "I should have stopped it. The seat thing. I knew it felt wrong." Leonard studied him. "Knowing isn't the same as acting." The captain nodded slowly. "You're right." A silence passed between them, not hostile, but heavy. "They're going to investigate," the captain said. "They should." The captain hesitated. "If there's anything I can do." Leonard shook his head. "Do better next time. That's enough." The captain nodded once and walked away. Leonard returned to the room. The officials looked up as he entered. "I'll give you your statement," Leonard said. "But understand this. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in correction." The woman folded her hands. "What does that look like to you?" Leonard leaned forward. "Training that addresses bias, not just procedure. Authority structures that don't collapse under pressure. And accountability that doesn't wait for headlines." The younger man sighed. "You're asking for a cultural overhaul." Leonard's voice was quiet but immovable. "I'm asking for lives to matter equally." No one argued. When it was done, when the signatures were signed, and the recorder clicked off for the last time. Leonard stepped outside into the cool air. Dawn was beginning to break the sky, streaked with pale grey and gold. His phone buzzed again. A message from FAA operations. We will be reviewing all relevant protocols. Your involvement will be requested. Leonard typed back. I'll be available. He slipped the phone away and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond it was home. Beyond that, a system that would resist change until it was forced. Leonard Brooks squared his shoulders and began to walk, knowing with absolute clarity that the flight had ended. But the reckoning had only just begun. Morning came without ceremony, a thin grey light bleeding through the terminal windows like a reluctant confession. Leonard sat alone near the far end of the gate area, a paper cup of coffee cooling untouched in his hand. The airport around him was waking up slowly. Janitors pushed carts. A maintenance crew argued quietly over a ladder. The world, indifferent as ever, was moving on. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the jolt of the landing again, heard the oxygen masks drop, saw the man's chest rise and fall under his hands, heard his daughter's voice, small and steady, telling him he always did the right thing. Leonard exhaled and rubbed his face. Footsteps approached. He didn't look up at first. You should drink that before it turns into regret. The voice was familiar. Leonard lifted his head. The older woman from the flight stood in front of him, coat draped over her arm, hair slightly out of place now that the moment had passed. She looked tired but alert, alive in a way that came from having stared something terrible in the face and walked away. Good morning, Leonard said. She sat down beside him without asking. I never got your full name. Leonard Brooks. She nodded. I'm Margaret Hale. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a plane taxi past the window. You know, Margaret said I spent 40 years working in public schools, administration, policy, committees. I learned early that systems don't break because of accidents. They break because people stop questioning them. Leonard glanced at her. That sounds familiar. She smiled faintly. I recognized it in you. Leonard took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm. He didn't mind. You shouldn't have come into that room last night. Margaret waved a hand. Someone needed to say what they were trying not to hear. Leonard nodded. Thank you. A group of passengers from the flight passed by, some casting glances his way. A few nodded. One man hesitated, then approached. He was the one who had complained about the diversion, the one with the navy blazer. He looked smaller now, shoulders slumped, bravado stripped away. Mr. Brooks, he said stiffly. I wanted to say something. Leonard waited. I've been thinking, the man continued, eyes darting briefly to Margaret, then back. About what I said, how I acted. Leonard's face remained neutral. I was wrong, the man said. And I don't just mean last night. I mean before that. A lot of before that. Margaret studied him closely. Leonard nodded once. That's a start. The man swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. Leonard met his gaze. Then don't ask for it. Ask yourself why it was so easy to doubt me. The man's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly as if absorbing a blow that couldn't be deflected. I will. He walked away without another word. Margaret exhaled. You don't waste words. Leonard watched the man disappear into the crowd. Words are easy. Change is expensive. A shadow fell across them. Leonard looked up. 2 airline executives stood there, both men in their 50s suits, too crisp for the hour. Behind them hovered a younger assistant, clutching a tablet like a shield. Mr. Brooks, the taller one, said, extending a hand. I'm Daniel Whitaker, Senior Operations. Leonard did not take the hand immediately. He stood instead. Slowly, deliberately. The men shifted suddenly, aware of the imbalance. Yes, Leonard said. Whitaker lowered his hand, masking the moment with a practiced smile. We wanted to thank you personally. What you did last night was extraordinary. Leonard's eyes were steady. It shouldn't have been necessary. Whitaker's smile tightened. Nevertheless, the airline would like to offer. No, Leonard said. The word landed cleanly. The second executive cleared his throat. You haven't heard what we're offering. Leonard shook his head. I don't need to. If it's private, it misses the point. Margaret watched them closely now. Whitaker adjusted his stance. We're facing significant exposure. Public, regulatory. We'd like your cooperation in framing what happened. Leonard tilted his head. Framing or fixing? Whitaker hesitated. Too long. Leonard continued, voice calm but edged with steel. You want a narrative. I want a correction. Those aren't the same thing. The younger assistant shifted nervously. The second executive tried a different approach. We're prepared to invest in new training initiatives, diversity panels, awareness programs. Leonard's eyes hardened. Awareness didn't save that man's life last night. Whitaker frowned. Then what do you want? Leonard glanced at Margaret, then back at the men. Transparency, independent review, and the courage to admit that what happened wasn't a glitch. It was predictable. The men exchanged looks. That could be damaging, Whitaker said. Leonard nodded. Truth often is. Margaret stood, then straightening her coat. Gentlemen, I watched your crew ignore a man who was competent, calm, and right because he didn't fit their expectations. If you think this ends with a settlement and a press release, you're mistaken. Whitaker looked at her sharply. And you are. She met his gaze. Someone who votes, writes, and doesn't forget. Silence stretched. Whitaker exhaled slowly. We'll be in touch. Leonard nodded. I'm sure you will. They walked away, their confidence visibly diminished. Margaret sat back down. They underestimated you. Leonard looked toward the window again. They underestimated the moment. His phone buzzed. This time, he answered. Leonard Brooks, he said. A familiar voice came through the line, clipped and controlled. Leonard, it's Thomas Green. Leonard closed his eyes briefly. I figured you'd call. We're convening a joint review, Green said. FAA, DOT, independent auditors. This won't stay internal. Leonard nodded. Good. There will be pushback. There always is. Green paused. Are you prepared to be very unpopular for a while? Leonard looked at Margaret at the bustling terminal at the ordinary morning unfolding around an extraordinary night. I've been unpopular before. Another pause. We'll need your testimony. You'll have it. The call ended. Margaret studied him. You just set something in motion. Leonard stood, slinging his jacket over his shoulder. No. It was already in motion. Last night just made it visible. "Where are you headed now?" she asked. Leonard checked the departure board. A flight to Chicago blinked on delayed but boarding. "Home," he said. Margaret smiled softly. "Your daughter?" "Yes." As Leonard walked toward the gate, a few people recognized him now. Whispers followed. Phones lifted discreet but hungry. He ignored them all. At the gate he paused, once looking back at the vast terminal, the systems humming, the people moving inside structures they trusted without ever seeing. Leonard Brooks adjusted his jacket and stepped forward, fully aware that the next time he boarded a plane, the seat would matter far less than the reckoning still unfolding above and beyond it. Chicago greeted him with low clouds, and the smell of rain soaked into concrete. Leonard stepped off the jet bridge with a carry-on slung over his shoulder, moving at the unremarkable pace of a man returning from a routine trip. No escort, no announcement, just the quiet weight of eyes that recognized him and didn't know what to do with that recognition yet. At baggage claim, a television mounted above the carousel flickered with a morning news segment. His face appeared briefly on the screen, grainy footage pulled from a phone video inside the cabin. The headline crawled beneath it, cautious and incomplete. Passenger intervention. Forces emergency landing. Leonard looked away. His phone buzzed again. Messages stacked one after another. Unknown numbers. Old colleagues who hadn't called in years. A text from Thomas Green that read, "Only brace yourself." Leonard slipped the phone into his pocket without replying. He spotted her before she saw him. Emily stood near the security barrier, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Pink sneakers, flashing against the tile. Her jacket was half-zipped, hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail that said her grandmother had tried and failed to tame it. She scanned every face that passed, hope and impatience warring in her expression. Leonard stopped walking. For a moment he just watched her. The noise of the terminal faded. The weight of the last 24 hours pressed down on him all at once, sharp and sudden. He had faced rooms full of officials without blinking, but this made his chest tighten. Dad Emily saw him and broke free, ducking under the barrier before anyone could stop her. She ran straight into him, arms wrapping around his waist, face pressed into his jacket. Leonard dropped his bag and held her. Really held her, lifting her off the ground as she laughed and squealed. "You said you'd be home," she said into his chest. "I am, Leonard," replied, voice rough. "I'm right here." His mother hurried over, breathless eyes wet. She didn't speak at first. She just touched his arm, then his face, as if checking that he was solid and real. "I saw the news," she said finally. "They didn't know what to make of it." Leonard nodded. "Neither do I." They walked together toward the exit. Emily's hand firmly locked in his. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The city loomed grey and familiar, comforting in its indifference. At home, Leonard dropped his bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch as Emily climbed up beside him, curling against his side like she had when she was smaller. "Grandma says you were on TV," Emily said. "Is that true?" Leonard glanced at his mother, who busied herself in the kitchen, giving him space. "A little," he said. "Did you fix the plane?" Emily asked, eyes wide. Leonard smiled faintly. "I helped." Emily considered that. Did you get in trouble? Leonard laughed quietly. Not yet. She frowned. Why would you get in trouble for helping Leonard? Closed his eyes for a moment. Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated. Emily nodded solemnly, as if that confirmed something she'd already suspected. My teacher says doing the right thing is more important than following the rules. Leonard opened his eyes and looked at her. Your teacher sounds smart. Emily beamed. Later, after homework and dinner, and the familiar ritual of brushing teeth and bedtime stories, Leonard tucked Emily into bed. She grabbed his hand before he could stand. Dad, she whispered. Were you scared? Leonard thought about the landing, the man on the floor, the sound of the wheels hitting the runway, the moment in the cockpit when every option narrowed to a single decision. A little, he said honestly. Emily squeezed his fingers. That's okay. You were brave anyway. Leonard swallowed. Go to sleep. She did her breathing evening out within minutes. Leonard stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall, letting the quiet seep into him. Downstairs, his phone buzzed again. He answered this time. Leonard Thomas Green said without preamble. It's moving faster than expected. Leonard leaned against the kitchen counter. Define faster. Congressional inquiry. Public hearings. The airline is pushing back hard. Leonard closed his eyes. Of course they are. They're questioning your role, Green continued, implying overreach, improper influence. Leonard let out a slow breath. They're afraid of precedent. Yes, Green agreed, and they're afraid of you. Leonard looked toward the staircase, toward his daughter's room. I'm not interested in being a symbol. Green paused. That ship has sailed. Another call came in. Leonard declined it. What do you need from me? Leonard asked. Your voice, Green said. And your patience. They'll try to turn this into something it's not. Leonard nodded. They always do. After the call ended, Leonard sat alone at the kitchen table. The house quiet around him. He stared at the grain of the wood, thinking about systems and people and the fragile line between order and harm. His phone buzzed again, a message this time from an unfamiliar number. We need to talk. I owe you more than an apology. Leonard didn't have to ask who it was from. He typed back. Tomorrow. Public place. The reply came quickly. Understood. The next morning, Leonard walked into a small diner near his neighborhood, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long. The man from the flight was already there, sitting stiffly, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. Mr. Brooks, the man said, standing awkwardly. Leonard gestured for him to sit. Let's keep this simple. The man nodded, visibly relieved. I've been thinking about what you said, about why it was easy to doubt you. Leonard waited. I realized, the man continued, that I've spent my life assuming competence looks a certain way, sounds a certain way, and when it doesn't, I get uncomfortable. Leonard sipped his coffee. Discomfort is a teacher if you let it be. The man swallowed. I don't know how to fix that. Leonard met his eyes. You start by not asking the people you hurt to fix it for you. The man nodded slowly. I wanted you to know I spoke to my company about training. About accountability. Leonard shrugged. That's your work. When the man left, Leonard stayed staring out the window as traffic crawled past in the grey morning light. He felt no satisfaction, no closure, just a steady resolve. By the time Leonard returned home, his phone was ringing again. This time it was a reporter. Mr. Brooks. How does it feel to be at the center of a national conversation? Leonard paused before answering. He thought of Emily's voice, of Margaret Hale, of the man on the floor of the cabin. It feels overdue, he said. That night, as Leonard stood at his kitchen window watching the city lights flicker on, he understood something clearly for the first time. This was no longer about a flight or a seat or a single decision made under pressure. It was about what happened when quiet competence collided with a system built on assumption. And this time, Leonard Brooks wasn't going to step aside and let the moment pass. The hearing room was colder than it needed to be, the kind of cold meant to keep people alert and uncomfortable at the same time. Leonard sat at the long table facing the panel hands folded, posture relaxed but deliberate. Behind him, rows of seats filled slowly with aides, journalists, and observers who had already decided what kind of story they wanted this to be. Microphones were tested, cameras adjusted. Quiet conversations died the moment the doors closed. The chairwoman cleared her throat. This session will come to order. Leonard did not look at the cameras. He looked at the people who would decide what mattered. Mr. Brooks. She said, you have been called here as a private citizen whose actions during Flight 721 triggered a chain of regulatory consequences. Before we begin, do you understand why you're here? Leonard nodded once. Yes, ma'am. And do you agree that your actions exceeded the role of a passenger? Leonard considered the question carefully. I agree. They exceeded what the system expected. A murmur rippled through the room. The airline's counsel leaned into his microphone voice, smooth and rehearsed. Mr. Brooks, with all due respect, isn't it true that your prior involvement in aviation oversight created an implicit authority that influenced crew behavior? Leonard turned his head slightly, meeting the man's eyes. Isn't it true that authority should never depend on whether someone recognizes it? The counsel smiled thinly. That's not an answer. Leonard's voice remained even. It is the answer. The chairwoman raised a hand. Let him finish. Leonard leaned forward just enough to engage the room. I did not announce who I was. I did not demand control. I responded when people were at risk, and hesitation was creating danger. If that disrupts expectations, then the expectations need examination. A journalist scribbled furiously. Someone whispered. Another panel member spoke up, older measured, Mr. Brooks. Some have argued that your presence exposed vulnerabilities that could undermine public confidence in air travel. Leonard nodded. Confidence built on silence is fragile. The airline counsel interjected. Are you suggesting airlines should encourage passengers to intervene? Leonard shook his head. I'm suggesting airlines should remove the conditions that make intervention necessary. The chairwoman watched him closely. You're asking for systemic change. Yes, Leonard said. Because this wasn't an anomaly, it was a stress test. A pause followed, heavy with implication. From the back of the room, a familiar figure rose. Margaret Hale. She did not wait to be recognized. I request permission to speak, she said. The chairwoman hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, Margaret stepped forward, voice steady. I was on that flight. I watched a capable man be treated as a problem before anyone bothered to understand him. And I watched him save a life while others argued about protocol. If this hearing is about confidence, then understand this. My confidence wasn't shaken by him. It was shaken by everything that came before he stood up. She sat down without waiting for a response. The room was silent. The airline counsel cleared his throat. Emotions aside, we must consider liability. Leonard turned fully toward him. Liability is what happens when responsibility is deferred. The chairwoman leaned back slightly. Mr. Brooks, do you believe bias played a role in the events leading up to the diversion? Leonard did not hesitate. Yes. A sharp intake of breath echoed somewhere behind him. In what way she pressed? Leonard's gaze remained steady. In who was questioned? In who was doubted? In how quickly inconvenience became justification. Bias doesn't announce itself. It shows up as delay, dismissal, and disbelief. The counsel shook his head. That's speculative. Leonard looked at him calmly. Then explain why my seat was questioned before my ticket. Why my compliance was demanded before my explanation. Why my competence was doubted until it was undeniable. No answer came. The chairwoman glanced down at her notes, then back up. What would you recommend this body do? Leonard inhaled slowly. Mandate bias training that isn't symbolic. Require escalation pathways that don't rely on hierarchy alone. And create accountability measures that activate before harm, not after headlines. The panel exchanged looks. And if airlines resist, one member asked. Leonard's voice hardened just slightly. Then they should explain why profit margins matter more than people. The cameras clicked. After hours of questioning, the room finally emptied. Leonard stepped into the hallway, shoulders heavy, but spine straight. Reporters surged forward, voices overlapping. Mr. Brooks, do you think this will change anything? Are you worried about retaliation? Do you see yourself as a whistleblower? Leonard stopped. The noise fell back. I see myself as a father who wants his daughter to grow up in a country where competence isn't questioned because of appearance, he said. If that makes me inconvenient, so be it. He walked away without another word. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. Leonard paused at the top, breathing in the air, letting the tension bleed out slowly. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Green. You shifted the conversation. They can't unhear it now. Leonard typed back. Good. That was the point. Another message followed this one from an unknown number. We were wrong. Changes are coming. Thank you. Leonard stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone into his pocket. That evening, he sat on the edge of Emily's bed as she worked through a math problem, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Dad, she said, suddenly looking up. What's a hearing? Leonard smiled faintly. It's when grown-ups have to listen. She considered that. Did they listen to you, Leonard? Thought of the room, the questions, the silence afterward. Some of them did. Emily nodded, satisfied. Good. Because you're usually right. Leonard laughed softly and kissed the top of her head. As he turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, Leonard understood that the hardest part hadn't been the flight or the landing or even the hearing. It was standing still long enough for the world to look back at itself. And this time it had. The first change did not come with an announcement. It came quietly buried in a revised training memo that most people would never read. A new escalation protocol. A rewritten paragraph about passenger disputes. A single added line about bias awareness that was no longer optional, no longer symbolic. Leonard saw it on his phone while sitting at his kitchen table. Emily across from him coloring inside a book she had long outgrown but refused to throw away. He read the line twice, then a third time. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was something real. Leonard set the phone down and watched his daughter hum softly to herself, her crayon moving in careful strokes. He thought about how many systems change this way, not with speeches or headlines, but with small edits made under pressure by people who finally understood they were being seen. The media cycle burned hot and fast, then began to cool. Leonard's name appeared less often. The story shifted from a man on a plane to policy debates and corporate statements. He let it happen. He had never wanted the spotlight. He wanted the work to stick. One afternoon, a package arrived at the door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note and a folded airline wing pin, the kind pilots wore on their jackets. "Thank you for reminding us what responsibility looks like." Leonard closed the box and placed it in a drawer he kept for things that mattered quietly. The airline executives called again this time with different voices, less polished, less defensive. They talked about committees, about oversight, about long-term reform. Leonard listened. He didn't flatter them. He didn't reassure them. He told them the truth and let the silence do the rest. At night, when the house was quiet, Leonard sometimes replayed the sound of the landing in his mind. The impact, the slowing. The moment when chaos gave way to stillness. He didn't romanticize it. He respected it. The same way he respected fire or the ocean or any force that demanded humility. Margaret Hale sent him a postcard from a small coastal town. She wrote in careful script, the kind learned before keyboards replaced pens. "I spent my life fighting meetings that didn't want to change. It mattered that you stood up. It mattered that people saw it." Leonard placed the postcard on the refrigerator, right next to Emily's school photo. Months passed. The hearings concluded. Reports were published. Some recommendations were adopted. Others stalled. Leonard knew better than to expect perfection. Progress was uneven. It always was. One evening, Emily sat beside him on the couch, legs tucked under her, watching the news. A short segment played about updated airline training standards. Leonard's face did not appear. His name was not mentioned. Emily glanced up at him. "Is that because of you?" Leonard considered his answer. "It's because of a lot of people." She nodded thoughtfully. "But you helped." "Yes," Leonard said. "I did." Emily smiled and leaned against him. That was enough. Later that night, Leonard stood by the window, city lights stretching out below. He thought about the man whose heart had nearly failed, about the crew members who had learned something uncomfortable, about the executives who had finally stopped pretending the problem was abstract. He thought about his daughter growing up in a world that would test her in ways he could not control, a world that would try to tell her who she was before asking who she could be. Leonard knew he couldn't shield her from that, but he could make it harder for the system to look away. His phone buzzed one last time before he went to bed. A message from Thomas Green. "You did more than you know," Leonard typed back. So did others. He set the phone down and turned off the light. The story did not end with applause or victory music. It ended the way most real change does, with a man returning to his life carrying the quiet knowledge that when the moment came, he did not step aside. If this story meant something to you, if you believe quiet courage still matters, take a moment to subscribe, and leave a comment with these 3 words: do the right.